Let's begin with a question. How do ancient cultures describe something they can't fully explain? The answer is simple. They tell a story. But these weren't bedtime tales. They were codes, myths encoded with meaning, passed down to preserve events far too large, too cosmic, to be captured by primitive language alone. And one of the most mysterious of these stories is the tale of Tiamat. In ancient Babylonian and Sumerian texts, Tiamat is described as a primordial goddess, the mother of all creation. She rules over salt water and chaos, the oceanic void that existed before anything else. But there's another interpretation. According to researchers like Zecharia Sitchin, Tiamat wasn't just a symbolic figure. She may have been a real celestial body, a massive planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter. So who or what was Tiamat? Was she a goddess? Was she a planet? The answer is both. To understand Tiamat's dual identity, we must first understand how ancient myths were constructed. In the ancient world, gods were not seen as abstract, invisible beings. They were forces of nature, given names, personalities, and stories to help humans make sense of the cosmos. Tiamat, therefore, represents more than just a character in a myth. She represents primordial matter, the raw, unshaped chaos of the early universe. In myth, she gives birth to the first generation of gods. But if we take the next step and interpret this myth as a record of real cosmic events, then the idea of Tiamat being a planet makes sense. Ancient texts speak of her watery body, her violent nature, and her role in the creation of the earth. All of these could be descriptions of a world covered in oceans, torn apart in a catastrophic collision. And that's where the story gets even more interesting. Because according to both the myth and the modern interpretation, Tiamat was destroyed. Not by erosion, not by time, but by a collision, one so powerful, it reshaped our entire solar system. Ancient texts describe a dramatic battle, a war between gods. In this cosmic story, Tiamat becomes enraged after the death of her consort, Apsu. She creates monstrous beings, appoints a general named Kingu, and prepares for war against the younger gods. But let's pause for a moment. What does any of this actually mean? To a literal reader, it sounds like myth. But if we treat this story as a symbolic account of astronomical events, the pieces begin to fall into place. According to Zecharia Sitchin and others who have studied Sumerian tablets through this lens, the gods were not spirits in the sky. They were celestial bodies, planets, moons, forces of orbit and gravity, recorded as personalities. And Tiamat, the chaos goddess, was one of them. A large, water-rich planet, possibly larger than Earth, that orbited our sun between what we now know as Mars and Jupiter. So when the myth tells us that Marduk challenged Tiamat and defeated her in battle, it might actually be describing a planetary collision. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk uses a net of winds to trap Tiamat and then splits her in two with a divine weapon. Now pause again. This isn't a god wielding a net and spear. This is ancient language describing something far more physical. A massive gravitational event, a rogue planet, or perhaps a wandering celestial body passing through the early solar system. Its approach disturbs the orbits of existing planets. It strikes Tiamat and splits her in two. Let's decode this line by line. Marduk trapped Tiamat with his net of winds. A rogue planet's powerful gravitational field ensnares another planet, altering its trajectory. He pierced her heart with a lightning bolt, the violent energy exchange of a high-speed collision, shockwaves, plasma discharge, and fragmentation. He split her body in two, the moment of impact, the destruction of Tiamat. What happened next is recorded both in the tablets and in the structure of our solar system. One half of Tiamat was shattered completely, becoming what we now call the asteroid belt. The surviving portion was pulled into a new orbit around the Sun and reformed over time into the planet we now live on, Earth. This, according to Sitchin and others, is the true meaning behind the myth. From her body, heaven and earth were formed, not poetic, not imaginary, a record, encoded in the language of gods, of a planetary cataclysm that created our world. So far, we've decoded the ancient myth of Tiamat's destruction as a metaphor for a planetary collision, a celestial war retold in the language of gods. Now let's ask a harder question. Is there any actual evidence that such a planet once existed? And more importantly, is there any actual evidence? Did it really shatter to form the Earth, the Moon, and the asteroid belt, as the ancient tablets suggest? To answer that, we need to look at the solar system not just as it is now, but as it may have once been. Modern astronomers have long acknowledged a strange gap between Mars and Jupiter, a region that defies the pattern of planetary spacing known as the Titius-Bode law. Instead of a large planet, we find rubble. This region is known as the asteroid belt, a scattered field of debris, rocks, and failed protoplanets. But what if it's not a region where a planet failed to form? What if it's the remains of a planet that was destroyed? That's precisely what Sitchin, and even some mainstream theorists like Tom Van Flandern, propose. They call it the exploded planet hypothesis. In this theory, the asteroid belt is the fragmented shell of a world that once orbited there. That world, they argue, was Tiamat. According to Sitchin's interpretation, Earth is not an original planet. It's a reassembled fragment, the remaining portion of Tiamat that was knocked into a new orbit by Marduk's gravitational force. This explains Earth's peculiar tilt, its abundance of water, and even the presence of our moon, which may have been part of Tiamat's smaller satellites, or Kingu, as the myth names it. And that brings us to an astonishing idea. Earth is the living corpse of a former world. The myth tells us that Tiamat gave the tablets of destiny to Kingu, her general and consort. After Tiamat's defeat, Kingu is stripped of his title, and his body is repurposed. Sitchin identifies Kingu as Earth's moon. Why? Because the moon is unusually large for its host planet. It shares strange elemental similarities with Earth, but is missing an iron core. This has led to scientific theories like the giant impact hypothesis, which says the moon may have come from Earth after a collision. But what if it's the other way around? What if Earth and the moon both came from Tiamat? Why not simply say, a planet was destroyed and Earth formed from the debris? The answer lies in how early civilizations viewed reality, and how different that was from modern thinking. To the ancients, everything in existence was alive. A storm wasn't just weather, it was the breath of a god. The ocean wasn't just water, it was the body of a divine force. And planets were beings, intelligent, conscious, eternal. So when they described Tiamat as a goddess of chaos, they were doing more than telling a story. They were describing a conscious planetary force, something vast, elemental, and self-aware. They believed events had both physical and spiritual consequences. So when Tiamat was destroyed, it wasn't just debris scattering through space. It was the death of a mother, the breaking of a living womb, the end of the original feminine force in the cosmos, and the birth of structure, patriarchy, and control. Tiamat is gone, but her story is not finished. She gave birth to the cosmos, and in return, she was torn apart. And now her memory, buried beneath myth and stone, is waking up again. Reclaiming the story of Tiamat is more than mythological curiosity. It's about restoring balance between the feminine and the masculine, the chaotic and the structured, the wild and the civilized, because Earth itself is Tiamat's body, and to remember her is to remember where we come from. The story of Tiamat is not just ancient mythology, It is a multidimensional code, a fusion of astronomy, cosmology, psychology, and spiritual memory. We've learned that Tiamat was both a goddess and a planet. Her destruction by Marduk is a metaphor for a planetary collision. Earth, the moon, and the asteroid belt may be her surviving remains. Ancient myths encoded real astronomical events, and her story reminds us of the sacred feminine, once honored, now forgotten. Tiamat was never truly destroyed. She became us. And now, we remember. This is Hidden Origins TV, and today, we decoded the mystery of Tiamat, the planet they destroyed.